I've obviously played this in my head many times. It's like watching someone, blow their brains out, metaphorically. She said, "Oh, I've only got 2 years." And I said, "If you carry on like this, you'll have 2 months."
But it wasn't 2 months.
It was 2 weeks. Yeah, it was.
Well, I was sacked. I mean, let's not be cute about it.
So I'm here in our Hoxton studio, but today there is no George Osborne. He's off on holiday. Instead, we're starting the first of our special summer episodes. And I'm talking this morning to somebody who had a front row seat in one of the most dramatic moments in recent British economic history, former Chancellor Kwasi Kwarteng. We've just, both of us, dashed over from White City, where we were both recording Good Morning Britain this morning, live on TV. And good show, lots to talk about.
Yes, I mean, I was very impressed with the way that you, as a presenter, skipped from the budget to surgery, cosmetic surgery, the issues relating to that. And there's a really good blend, actually, on the show, which you do very well, between serious political comment and lighter issues that, of course, affect so many people.
I said the phrase Brazilian butt lift this morning in the context of government regulation of cosmetic surgery more times than I expected to say on breakfast television.
It wasn't a phrase that I expected to hear from you.
I know. I actually turned to Ranvi and said, "What is the difference between a Brazilian and a Brazilian butt lift?" And she said that was an inappropriate conversation to have so early in the day. So we moved on. So I'm talking to Kwasi Kwarteng, MP since 2010, appointed as Business Secretary by Boris Johnson, then Chancellor with Liz Truss, her short-lived premiership. He delivered the mini budget, one of the most dramatic events of recent years of economic history, the fallout of which clearly defined the period which came after. I think normally, Kwasi, when you are doing interviews, since you came out of Parliament, people start with, the end of your time as Chancellor.
Sure.
But I'm going to start in a different place. I'm going to start with the beginning and how you got there. Born in London.
Sure.
Your mum and dad both came to Britain from Ghana as students, an economist as a barrister.
That's right.
Scholarship boy at Eton.
That's right.
Double first at Cambridge.
Yes, that's right.
The interesting thing about your time at Cambridge, I know from contemporaries, was that you were a very big figure, known across the university, really clever, kind of had a big impact. Then in the winning team of University Channel.
Yes, that was something that made me known, I suppose.
Yeah, but I think you were known for wider reasons than that. People thought this is a rising star. You were in the city, lots of different prestigious places, Chase, JP Morgan, columnist for The Telegraph, in as an MP in 2010, partly held back by that sort of David Cameron decision not to appoint people quickly. But despite that, you still become Cabinet Minister young. You were on a trajectory to the highest offices of state, and that was kind of obvious to everybody really, really early on.
Well, look, I mean, I think it's easy with hindsight to say there was a kind of inevitability to it. I don't think there was. I mean, at the time, I wasn't actually at university very focused on politics. I was much
You actually
more
did classics and history.
That's right, and it was only through history that I got into politics and economic history. So in the end, I did a PhD at Cambridge. But I was very much somebody who didn't really have a career plan at the beginning of my time at university. Some people go to university and think they want to be Prime Minister or Chancellor or whatever.
And you were a Kennedy Scholar at Harvard.
I was.
Which is what you do when you've not got a career plan.
Well, it was it's a good question. But the fact that I went back and did a PhD and was sort of thinking about academia suggests that I wasn't on the classic political career track. But I suppose I was very focused. I think the immigrant background helps with that. I remember talking to my parents about the possibility of taking a gap year. They were quite popular. I don't know what the state is now in Britain, but people used to take a gap year, between school and university. And I remember my parents didn't really understand why anyone would do that.
They thought, get on with it.
Get on with it. And I think lots of parents are like that. Yeah. So I remember thinking, so you do have that slight sort of immigrant expectations. People talk about tiger mothers. I don't think my mother was ever like that. But there's an expectation among many immigrant families that the kids, have to do well through education and they have to get on, as it were.
And you couldn't have gone to Eton without the scholarship?
No, I mean, I was at a prep school before that, so that was a fee-paying school. But it would have been challenging. Who knows? But in the end, actually, I got a full fee scholarship. That was what was on offer at the time, and I did well enough to get that. And of course, that eased my parents' responsibilities
So
in that way.
in that first period when you're an MP, you are actually part of an intellectual group which is about the future of conservatism and Britain. You write a book, Britannia Unchained, which has a number of different prestigious contributors, including Liz Truss.
Sure.
And there is a trajectory, isn't there? So Boris Johnson resigns. You aren't one of the people who is seen to be pushing him out. Liz Truss kind of emerges in the leadership election as the likely candidate. Early on, you are a supporter of hers. And what is interesting when you look back at the accounts of that period, from the beginning of her leadership campaign, in particular before the first debate, she is deciding to go for quite a shock and awe strategy.
That's right.
There is a sense that the British economy is stuck, that we're not growing, that we need a real jolt of energy. She says, I'm going to kind of outflank the rather cautious Rishi Sunak with big tax cuts. She says we can borrow the money to pay for that. You come in as Chancellor. That's a strategy that you with her are adopting. Actually, on the day of the mini budget, where big package of tax cuts paid for by increased borrowing, income tax cut in the top rate of income tax. I mean, it's actually heralded as at last a conservative budget from the newspapers in that period. Because I know there were moments when economists within the team said, got to be careful here. The markets may not wear this. Were you worried, or did you think this is the plan I've been working with Liz for the last 10 years?
So the problem was there was massive mission creep, because during the summer when she campaigned for leader, she was very keen. There were two things we were going to do. We were going to undo the increase in national insurance, the rise, and we were going to stop the rise in corporation tax. And if we'd stuck to those two things, that was an expansion of about 35 billion. And I think we discussed commensurate, not exact penny for penny, but we discussed some spending restraint. And of course, as you know, in a budget, you have to present both. You have to do the expansionary stuff, and then also constrictive measures, such as either tax increases or spending restraint. You do the two together. We took a decision, and I think it was very much the Prime Minister driving this, but we discussed it, that we were just going to do the expansionary stuff. And I'm afraid, in terms of the expansionary stuff, two things happened. Three things. One, we didn't consult the OBR because we wanted to get going, and she felt, with some good arguments, that the OBR was a constraint, and this discussion is ongoing. So the second thing we thought was that we should get going, because we only had 2 years left of the Parliament, and she thought that was a very short time. I think it tended to be longer because things move so fast, but we had that debate. And then I think the real intellectual failing was we just didn't walk the walk on spending. And that's always the hardest part of this conversation.
I mean, she had resisted a big package to support households dealing with high energy bills, and then changed her mind. But announced a huge, very expensive.
I think
package.
I think loading that. So she announced that. I think, God forbid, the day Her Majesty passed away. And I remember we were on the front bench, and we got this news. But of course, we couldn't tell anybody that Her Majesty was gravely ill. And I remember there was a slight shift in mood from the front bench. I think Nadhim Zahawi was next to the Prime Minister, as I was. So that was one of those moments. But she went through with the energy announcement, as I remember, and then, which was a huge expansion.
It was.
And then, of course, the mini budget happened about probably 2 weeks after that. Yeah. So the market was essentially absorbing the massive intervention on energy prices, and then the unfunded tax cuts. And that was when things started to go haywire.
The market was also absorbing, on the first day you are Chancellor, the removal of Tom Scholar as Permanent Secretary.
So that was on the third day.
The
second
day.
Or third day, yes.
Right. But you'd spoken to him probably on the first or second day.
Yeah, no, you're right, actually. It was early on. So because he stayed, there was a couple of days, and then, Her Majesty passed away, but he was resolved to leave.
And there was also the decision, as you said, not to have an Office of Budget Responsibility forecast. My sense is that Liz Truss had a bad experience with Tom Scholar when she was the Chief Secretary of the Treasury. She hadn't liked the OBR. She wanted to go for big shock and awe tax cuts paid for by borrowing. You've come in as Chancellor. These are things which are her things, really, that you inherit. So, how much do you look back and think, I should have taken more control?
So I've obviously played this in my head many times. And I think the problem that we had, that chancellors and prime ministers have had, is that she just won a leadership contest. It wasn't me going around the country saying, vote for me.
And she had a mandate for tax cuts paid for by borrowing.
That's exactly right. She'd
the
gone through this.
Didn't feel any obligation to respect her mandate.
No, but you've campaigned largely on the agenda. And as I said, there was mission creep, so there was more stuff added, which that was probably one of the problems. But she'd won the leadership, and it wasn't my job. This is what I felt, and people might take a different view. It wasn't my job to then, from day one, start opposing what she was trying to do. I was very much a facilitator, for the mandate she had.
Although the budget you deliver is big, it's heralded by conservative newspapers. Markets are a bit wobbly. You then go on the Laura Kuenssberg show on the Sunday, and you say it's just the beginning.
Yeah, no,
everybody thinks Kwasi's going to do even more.
Yeah,
of
that
this. That looks like you owning it.
Yeah, I did own it. I mean, I'm not one of these people who said I had nothing to do with it. Of course, I was the Chancellor of the Exchequer. Of course, I had responsibility, but it was a team effort as well. And looking back, I could have reworded some of the things I said in the interview. The main thing I think that we got wrong, was not having the OBR. I think that was, and intellectually, and I wrote a book on this 10 years ago called War on Gold. I said to the Prime Minister, I've never been a Reaganite. I don't believe in unfunded tax cuts. What you should have is a balance between tax cuts and spending restraint.
And she said do the spending cuts later?
No, so we discussed, Simon Clarke, who was, I think, the local government secretary, in her campaign, we were discussing spending restraint. And we should have done the two together, because then the markets would have absorbed. It wouldn't have been politically popular. It never is when you're restraining spending. But at least it would have been more coherent. And I think the markets would have been more sympathetic to, and I spoke to a very senior banker before the mini budget, and he said, look, we don't want you to think there's such a thing as a free lunch. That's essentially his strapline of how the market saw things. So I think you've got to have some spending restraint. And this is what the government is trying to do, the Rachel Reeves with the welfare bill. You've got to have some spending restraint so that you can lighten the burden on taxes.
And when you don't get it, because you do a U-turn on your welfare reforms, that is a more challenging moment for the markets. This conversation isn't really about going through all the detail. That we can do that another time. You then have a couple of weeks. You have the market turmoil, the particular issues in the pension funds, Bank of England saying that they will do time-limited support.
That's what killed the government, by the way. The Bank of England, the window they gave to the pension funds, because we didn't know about that. And that's long-dated gilts that were very sensitive to interest rate movements. And as interest rates went up, the value that the funds had went down very sharply.
And they say they're going to support, but then announce the support will end on Friday.
Right, the 14th of October.
The Friday being the day.
That was the day I was sacked.
That's
not a coincidence. No. The window essentially shut on the 14th of October. I was called back on the 14th of October, on the 13th, the day before. Come back from Washington, driven to number 10.
Just before you get to that, because I wanted to tell you what was happening that day. It's sort of an interesting thing. The other thing, of course, we haven't mentioned, you also did the U-turn on the top rate of tax, which was politically significant. On that Friday, I teach a class at King's in London with Nick Macpherson, former Permanent Secretary John Davis. Lots of Treasury civil servants do it, a master's course. That week, by chance, we were doing 1976, the Wilson, Callaghan, Healey period. Sure. On that Friday, we were showing in London to our class of master's students the footage of Dennis Healey being pulled back from going out to the IMF, to be dragged in front of the Labour conference for him to tell them, you've got to get real about what's going on with the public finances, as he was negotiating the IMF programme. You'd been at the IMF meeting, had some tough conversations there, I know. You then get basically pulled back from the IMF
day before it was that was the bit that I said, why am I being pulled? You're just going to inflame the situation.
And then you find out as you drive in from the airport, this was happening in our class. We were announcing this to our class as it happened. This is history repeating itself. You find out from a Steve Swinford tweet that Liz Truss is planning to sack you when you arrive in Downing Street. I mean, that must have been a kind of surreal, sort of slow motion experience.
Look, the whole 3 weeks were very, very intense. And I was in the newspapers all the time, and all my friends were saying, "You're on the front page of every single newspaper every day." That's what it felt like. And then, being summoned the day before the IMF meeting was meant to close, you kind of know that there's going to be a big event. Either I thought I was going to be fronting a total reversal of the entire budget, and strategically somebody said she'll get you to front that, and then she'll sack you. So that was kind of what I was expecting. But as you say, I was in the cortege, I was in the car, and my SPAD showed me Steve Swinford's tweet. And I remember and she said, "Do you think this is true?" And I said, "It's absolutely 100% true."
But you also thought that it was politically crackers over.
I thought it was, yeah. I thought.
This is Margaret Thatcher, Nigel Lawson, but on warp speed.
Yeah, you don't have to be a great student of British history, political history, to understand that when the Prime Minister and the Chancellor fall out, that essentially shortens whoever the Prime Minister's shelf life is.
And you told her that.
I said, it's like watching someone, blow their brains out metaphorically, in terms of their political career, and it was obvious to me that. And then as soon as it was announced, a party donor WhatsApped me and said, "But this is just going to make it worse. The Prime Minister can't last for 2 weeks." And I just shrugged my shoulders. And I said...
And we know that some of her own people had also told her this isn't going to work.
It wasn't going to work. I mean, I think... Because the thing she'd done was that you can often sort of try and cut the Chancellor loose if it's their policy. So even with Thatcher and Lawson, there were issues relating to the ERM, tracking the Deutschmark. There were a whole bunch of things that he'd done that she wasn't aware of. And so she was justified, perhaps.
But she was aware of everything you had done. In fact, she was the author.
I'd made it a point to say that I will be joined to what the Prime Minister does, because she'd just won this leadership contest. And so I was very careful not to try and supplant her or go against what I thought her mandate was.
Did you tell her what she should do, as opposed to tell her not to do what she was about to do?
So about 2 weeks before that, I said, when the mini budget, the first sort of ripple effect of the mini budget and the market turmoil, I said, we need to just calm everything down. It's like that in life. There are some moments, if you're in extreme turbulence, you need to just dial down the pressure and the excitement.
At what point did you know
very, very calm.
That was needed? Because you didn't know that at the Koonsberg interview.
No, but I was responsible for that, and so I could see that was. And then I just said, I think so. The mini budget was on the 23rd. The interview, I think, was on the 25th.
And the markets were very destabilised Monday and Tuesday.
That's right. But the pound almost hit parity. I mean, that's what I was terrified of. But the pound was coming up actually at the beginning of October. And I said, what we need to do now is just to essentially be very still. And then she said to me, and it was reported at the time, I'm not just making it up, I mean, there's documentary evidence of it. It was in the newspapers. She said, I've only got 2 years. And I said, if you carry on like this, you'll have 2 months. Because you could tell it was just too frenzied and frenetic.
But it wasn't 2 months.
It was 2 weeks. Yeah, it was
in the end days. There's something I want to ask you about that. But before we do, we've just had this week the news on Sunday. Kemi Badenoch, I think, has had a change of strategy. Until now, she's been very cautious about being critical of the Liz Truss period. Yeah. Mel Stride was allowed to go out and make a critical speech about what had happened. Kemi Badenoch had allowed that on other areas of policy immigration, not on the mini budget and the sort of the Truss Kwarteng period, if you like. She went out on Sunday and said that this was, that Rachel Reeves was making the same mistakes that Liz Truss had made. That she said
that we'd made.
They aren't learning from our mistakes. And then Liz Truss hit back and said, this is a spurious narrative diverting from the real failures of 14 years of Conservative government in which her supporters are particularly implicated. And then Kemi Badenoch is now hit back again to say, as former Prime Minister and Foreign Secretary, she carries quite a lot of that blame. It's kind of an unseemly row between a current leader and a former Prime Minister. On the other hand, is it the right thing for Kemi Badenoch? I think she's clearly decided that having a row with Liz Truss and you, although I think you're not giving her the row.
I'm not going into that. I mean, it's like a mud fight. I mean, it's not going to help the Conservative Party. I mean, having Kemi Badenoch and Liz Truss having a ding-dong battle about whose fault it is, it doesn't help the party at all, because what the party needs to do is essentially project sort of unity, a degree of competence, a degree of humility.
It doesn't help Liz Truss.
It doesn't help the party.
And you aren't doing it for that reason.
No.
But is Kemi Badenoch wrong to try to get definition going forward against...
Look, I think she should try and draw a line, but it's not just about Truss and me. It's about 14 years. I mean, when I talk to people, I look at the Conservatives who are flipping to reform. They talk about economic management, but they talk a lot about immigration.
They do,
and that's so she's got to somehow distance herself from a whole range of policies over that 14-year period, particularly at the last period.
On our podcast, George has often said though that she is wrong only to focus on these immigration or cultural issues, and that she ought to have gone harder on the economy earlier. She's been doing that more recently in PMQs. She clearly feels that it's very hard for her to do that against Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves unless she also says critical things.
Yeah, look, I think I don't blame her. I mean, if I were in her position, we can't say that the Tory party did particularly well, particularly at the end of that 14-year period. And in order to take the party forward, she's got to distance herself from a lot of what went wrong and what happened. So I think she's justified in doing that. As a loyal Conservative, people have to back her.
But you're not going to join in.
I'm not going to try.
If she rang you and said, "Kwasi, Liz has had a pop at me, which is really helpful. Do you mind doing the same?"
What, against Ben? No, I wouldn't say that. I would say, look, she's got to try and work out what she's for. So it's all right bashing Liz and me. It's all right bashing Rachel Reeves. But what is the Conservative Party actually standing for? And that's where I think they need to be more articulate and much clearer with the public.
What's the one thing that you would like her to talk more about than she's doing at the moment?
I think she's got to be more visible. I think they took a view, and I understand it, because we all grew up in the Labour Conservative alternation of power, essentially. And she took a view, and I've even heard George say this. The first 2 years, the public aren't listening to the opposition. And that's when so whatever you say doesn't matter. And you can essentially focus on reorganising the party and trying to get policy and the right people in place. I think with the rise of reform, the old playbook is irrelevant. You've got a party that's very noisy, that's quite engaged with public debate. Farage is a great communicator in his own way. And so you don't have the luxury of spending 2 years essentially looking internally and trying to rejig the party. You've got to be out there, making the case for what your party stands for. And I think initially she thought it was like the usual parliament where you just wait.
Right.
And I think now, given where Reform are in the polls, given where the Tories are, she's going out on the front foot.
So we are talking now, we're recording an hour before the Bank of England decision on interest rates. By the way, one of your great achievements is to entrench Bank of England independence and the role of the Office of Budget Responsibility for this generation. Nobody's going to doubt that.
And I think Bank of
England. Can I thank you on behalf of the nation?
Bank of England. I would go halfway with you on this. Bank of England independence is clearly important. I think this OBR thing is a very harsh discipline, if you like. And it's a false discipline because actually I think it'll force the government to raise taxes more than they need to be raised.
But let me ask you about Rachel Reeves. Obviously she's got a big fiscal challenge and there's lots of debate about what she'll have to do on tax in the autumn. The interesting thing is if you look in the current Ipsos ratings, her ratings are now almost identical to the ratings that you had just after the mini budget. So my question is, what should Rachel Reeves do to turn things round? And if she can turn things round, could you have turned things round if you'd been given the time?
So I always think
Truss?
You can. I remember at the time going back, I said, look, the fiscal black hole will shrink because energy costs, I was pretty convinced, were going to come down. The gas price was at a record high. And I thought as energy prices came down, the black hole in terms of the energy intervention would have decreased. And I said to the Prime Minister, I said to Liz, I said, look, if we get it to the new year, things will get better because the narrative will shift, other issues will come into play. And of course, but we didn't. I mean, we were 6 weeks before Christmas.
Although
and the
Jeremy
whole thing
Hunt ended up raising taxes rather than cutting them. Do you think you might have ended up having to do more to reverse the tax cuts?
I think that we needed to be tougher on spending.
Right.
And I think that was a gauntlet I was willing to run, because I think if you're a chancellor and you're trying to be unpopular, you're probably not. You're trying to be popular, rather. If you're trying to do popular things, I don't think it ends well generally. And I think Rachel Reeves has got to stick to her guns.
What does that mean, though, sticking to her guns? What is the thing for her to do now which means she can learn from your experience and get through this period, turn those poll rates around?
The thing we haven't talked about is Parliament, is the MPs. And I think clearly in her case, what she wanted to do was to be fiscally responsible, in inverted commas. She wanted to change the welfare arrangements we have. She wanted to reduce the spending on welfare, which I think was, laudable. But of course, her backbench MPs weren't prepared to do that. And I think that raises a whole bunch of issues about parliamentary management. We were in a similar position in that we tried, even though we had a majority, not as big as the Labour majority, but we tried to reduce spending. But a lot of our MPs just weren't, at that point we'd burnt through political capital and they weren't prepared to back us on that.
Liz Truss couldn't face them down.
No.
Can Rachel Reeves face them down?
I think it'll be impossible for her to do that. And in that context, if you're not getting growth, you can't borrow more, you can't reduce spending. The only thing you can do is increase taxes. Now, in my view, you might have a different view. The more you increase taxes, the more you disincentivize essentially people from working, from creating businesses. You basically put a dampener on the whole wealth creation impulse. And you're in this doom loop. And it's a phrase that not only Liz Truss used, but I remember Rachel Reeves accusing us when we were in government. I mean, I'd left the government, but the Conservatives were still there. She accused us of essentially creating this doom loop. She doesn't use that phrase anymore. I wonder why.
I'm not sure listening to this, it's obvious to her from what you've said what her path is. It sounds like it's...
Well, you see, the reason why I talked about Parliament is that I think you're right. I think she's very constrained because I know what she wants to do. And I think her plan is probably, given all the alternatives, the best plan available to her. But what we've seen with the welfare bill is that she doesn't have the parliamentary support backing to do what she wanted to do.
Let me end where we began with your career trajectory. So you had a meteoric rise and then a fall when you kind of lost your job after such a short period of time.
I was sacked. I mean, let's not be cute about it.
Absolutely. When you go back to the profiles written of you when you become Chancellor, people say he's clever. They also say he's arrogant, a bit hubristic, a bit lazy. Does he really listen? I think the interesting thing to me, because we've worked closely together on Good Morning Britain now for a couple of years.
Yeah.
I mean, you're not lazy. You're getting up at 5 in the morning to come on TV. You aren't, to me, arrogant. You are actually thoughtful and reflective and have a humility about what's happened. And you can talk about it, I have to say, in a very different way from Liz Truss. Don't comment upon that. You're clearly clever, but those profiles, I mean, that doesn't feel to me the Kwasi Kwarteng that I know in 2025. So my question is, were you always who you really are and the profiles were wrong? Or has something happened in your experience of coming out of Parliament, out of the Chancellor job, which has changed you?
So a bit of both. I mean, you will know, and you had profiles and, that what people say, it's a caricature.
Oh, I have.
Okay, it's a complete,
yes.
So, they'll have said all sorts of things, some of which, you'd recognise.
And you want to say, no, they didn't see the real me.
Well, yeah, I mean, so I've never been someone who's been obsessed with all of that. But, going through what I went through over, whatever it was, 5 weeks, in September to October 22. I mean, that, and you've lost your seat. You go through experiences that do bring you back down to earth. And I probably was a little bit more hubristic and confident. I had a pretty good career. I was rising through the government ranks. And then all of a sudden, you're called back from Washington. Everyone is watching. And the Prime Minister sacks you. And it's very, very public. And you can't go. And for 3 months afterwards, I was sort of in shell shock. I was absolutely amazed that it happened. And it takes you a while to get through that. I mean, it's probably similar to losing your seat in an election where you're expected to hold the constituency. There are lots of things in political life that happen that completely set your trajectory in a different way. And you've got to come to terms with that. And actually, what I really want to do, have wanted to do, is to grow and learn from the experience. I mean, I think it was Churchill, we always quote Churchill, well, I try to. Making mistakes, that's not the fault. It's not learning from them. That's where, there's real fault.
And you have learned?
I'm trying to learn. I'm trying to understand, what went wrong. I'm trying to understand how I could be more resilient. I'm trying to understand how I could be much more cautious, probably, than I was ahead of that mini budget. And you've got to grow through experience.
And what do you think that means for you next? Where do you take that?
Well, I mean, I'm doing a number of commercial things. I love talking about politics. In many ways, I think what's happening now is even more interesting than the period we lived through and where we were MPs.
The frustrating thing is you'd be a better Chancellor now.
Well, Tony Blair said that about being Prime Minister, didn't he? He said he'd be better. I think you learn a lot. I think and you learn from obviously good things, but you also learn from bad experiences. And it was such an intense, sort of emotionally draining 3 weeks or 5 weeks that I've tried to learn from it.
Kwasi Kwarteng, thank you so much for talking to me today.